Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. Happy March, end of March, early April at some point that this will be going up. I hope that you're all doing really well. I want to go through some mistakes I made when I first got into caring for plants very seriously. And I was reflecting on this recently about how differently I do things now than when I started. Now, obviously, as a bit of a disclaimer, I have been growing a hell of a lot of plants since maybe about 2020. Now, I grew 1 or 2 plants previous to this, on and off. You know, I had some cacti and stuff like that, but I wasn't seriously growing plants. So my experience is only really the last 4 years. While I had a lot of plants, that resulted in obviously a very steep learning curve. 4 years is really not a lot of time for, you know, learning about plants and growing lots of different types of plants. So just a disclaimer, I am no expert. I am not an expert. I have not been doing this for a very long time. I do have a YouTube channel where I talk about plants, my experience and things that I've learned and things that I do in my plant care, but I do not want you to believe that I'm an expert. I'm constantly learning, constantly making mistakes, and that's just how it is. So this is just a reflection on things that I do differently now and how I learned kind of through that process. I do have an ecology, environmental science background. I have a degree in environmental science. My day job is as an ecologist, and that does include botany, and it does include plant ID and stuff like that. So I do have a bit of a scientific knowledge background on plants, but that can be quite different to caring for plants physically and keeping them alive. That's not something I have to do in my job. So the first big thing that was, I guess, a mistake was not understanding light levels. This was something that I guess didn't take me that long to figure out because my plants were doing really not well. And I figured out pretty quickly that I was keeping my plants super far from a light source. Like, I'm talking buying an aloe vera and putting it in a dark corner of a big room that had one window and had no direct light, and, you know, not good placement at all. I did not understand how much light you really needed for plants, and they obviously declined pretty quickly. There was nothing that I could have done correctly otherwise, watering, humidity, all of that stuff, without the light levels. And honestly, it is still my #1 tip to this day that if your plant has adequate light, it's just so much more successful and more likely that your plant is going to be super healthy. If your plant doesn't get adequate light, they cannot make food and they will not survive. That is just the fact of it all. So I would like to have a moment of silence for all of those plants that I murdered by putting in a dark corner. Yes. A big part of this is not understanding the species that I had as well and what different light requirements, how that changes across species. Now, obviously, like a plant succulent like aloe vera that I'm specifically talking about, they require high levels of light. They come from desert, hot, arid environments, and they need a hell of a lot of light to successfully grow. That leads me straight to my second mistake, was not understanding or researching the species that I was actually caring for, which in hindsight, it is quite crazy that I never considered this at the beginning as an ecologist and as somebody that does identify plants outdoors. I guess I was looking at plant tags when I was buying plants at garden centres or online plant shops. I was like aware of what they were called, but it never occurred to me to, you know, do some research, Googling, ChatGPT. Well, that didn't exist back then, but, you know, figuring out what environment they are used to and how they grow in the wild. This is really the key to knowing how your plant is going to thrive and what you need to do in order for it to grow super successfully. And this goes across everything. Your watering, your substrate, humidity level, temperature, lighting, whether it goes dormant at certain periods of the year, how it flowers and why it flowers. All of this information is really going to tell you exactly what to do. That is your plant care guide. There's so many plant care guides online. I personally do them as well well, I haven't done some in a long time, but I have some on my channel. But like, that is your guide. That's telling you, does it like to be dry? Does it like to have humidity? Does it need higher temperatures? Does it need colder temperatures at certain periods of the year? That's going to tell you like what your methods need to be and how you're going to care for that plant successfully. So that was a big mistake I made, just not even considering that this, you know, making the connection between this plant I've just picked up in a garden centre is well, not all of them of course, some are hybrids and cultivars and only in cultivation, but if it was its own species, that this actually exists somewhere in the world, or it used to, maybe it's extinct, but it grew somewhere before and it grew in the environment that it was meant for. Mistake number 3, I'm going to call pest panic. The absolute panic mode that used to come over me seeing any kind of insect on my indoor plants. Now, this came from a huge lack of understanding of the relationships between insects and plants and identifying them. What is a certain insect and what is a pest or whatever. And it took me quite a while to figure this out, but also my learning curve was really halted, because whenever I would see something on my plant, I would panic that it was something harmful, like misidentifying springtails and thrips. Spider mites were always pretty easy to identify, and same with mealybugs, but I think thrips was probably the thing that I misidentified most often. And despite seeing that sometimes my plant was healthy, sometimes they were pests, but sometimes my plant was healthy, I'd see the insect and I'd panic. And I would, as they call it, throwing the kitchen sink at it, I would immediately employ 3 different methods all at once for killing everything on the plant. And that could be from neem oil, it could be diatomaceous earth I used a lot. And quite funnily, when I started using these things, I ended up actually killing some plants from the treatment. So for example, there was a particular plant I was growing, I can't remember what it was called. I think it was technically an outdoor plant that I was growing indoors, but it had very fuzzy, very velvety leaves. And I doused that plant in too high of a concentration of neem oil, and the plant just totally suffocated and died. A second example of that was I had a calathea, I think it was medallion maybe, saw insects on it and decided to rub diatomaceous earth into the grooves of the leaves. I have no idea where I got that information from or why I chose to do that. I probably saw it somewhere or thought that this was the way you're meant to apply this. And of course, this resulted in total desiccation of the leaves. They crumbled and died within 24 hours. And you know, that's a huge mistake that I made, was kind of going through the pest process in total panic mode and not stopping for a second and thinking, what is this insect actually? Is it causing harm to my plant? And just kind of taking it a little bit slower with treatment if it is a pest. Like, these things, they can go unnoticed, and of course they can start to damage your plants over time, but honestly, if you're being consistently observant and you only see 1 or 2, it's unlikely that it's going to murder your plant before you have a chance to treat it. So yes. And also understanding that actually there's certain invertebrates like springtails which are actually a sign of a healthy soil ecosystem, and they actually in turn make your plants healthier. They, you know, having soil that is alive, while a lot of people I think are quite afraid of that indoors, especially when it comes to organic content and things like that, having soil that is alive, it can only benefit your plant, and insects are a huge part of that. So trying to murder everything that is within your soil or on your plant is only going to make your plant actually unhealthier and unlikely to do as well in the long run. Mistake 4 that I made is similar to, these are kind of all connected of course, but not listening to my plants or not observing my plants as much and trying to, you know, thinking I've decided what they needed without actually assessing the plant itself. So a good example of this would be plant care advice that's saying water once a week, water every 2 weeks. That just doesn't work as advice, because how quickly your soil dries out or your substrate dries out is dependent on a million different factors. What the substrate is, what's your watering schedule, what's the outside environment, the humidity level, the temperature, all of these affect how quickly your soil dries out. Also the pot that you're using, whether it's porous or plastic. And so all of these things or apps that give you advice on this stuff are just never going to work, because it's not as simple as that. So once I started to rely on my own observation of how my plants were doing is when I really I feel like it really clicked for me with the plant care. Looking at your plant, does it look healthy? Are the leaves droopy and dry? Are they yellow and mushy? Are there injuries on the leaves that look like it could be eaten by something? Like, these are all the things that will tell you what your plant needs, and you need to kind of slow down and mindfully look at each plant to figure out what's going on. And then you can troubleshoot before you take action. That's a huge thing, is that I used to take action without even knowing if that was what my plant actually needed at the time. It was more me deciding, okay, today's my watering day. That's not how it worked. I guess it's not necessarily a mistake, but it's something I wanted to include because it is part of the plant care universe, I guess, is thinking that I needed loads of tools and equipment for caring for plants. Obviously, the amount of plants that you have dictate how much of this stuff you're gonna need, but a lot of it you don't need. That's kind of my main point here, is thinking that I needed, you know, Velcro straps, moisture meters, all of this kind of extra stuff that is thrown at you a lot with plant marketing. That really isn't necessary to actually grow a plant. Like, you can grow a plant indoors with very simple materials and not need any of this stuff. Half of the stuff, I actually did a video on this quite recently, things I no longer use in my plant care hobby, because like I don't really use any of those tools or equipment anymore. Like, a simple bit of twine and a scissors will do for a lot of your plant chores that you need to do. On top of that, you know, thinking I needed, you know, new shelves, new fans, new lights. Obviously my setup now is quite a techie setup in some ways, because I do have fans and I do have lights. That is not necessary for the plant care. Like, I could grow all of these plants without those things as well, and they would still do really well. That's just one thing I wanted to say, especially for, I'm assuming that a lot of people watching this video may be beginners, and that's why you're looking at this for advice. And I just want to put it out there that you really don't need all this stuff. Keep it simple and keep to your learning and observation and understanding your plants. And that's where a lot of the joy is going to come from. You also, as you go through this hobby, will find your own style of how you want to care for your plants. Some of us like to have all the extra stuff, some of us don't. Some of us, you know, really like being attentive with our plant care. Some of us are much more lazy. I would consider myself on the lazy side of that. And that's okay. Just find your own style and drown out the noise of what's being told to you that you need all these things, because you really don't. So that is it for a couple of mistakes that I made as a beginner in this hobby. As I said, I am constantly learning, and I'm sure that I could make another video like this in a couple of years on how I do things totally different maybe, or, you know, things change all the time. You learn new stuff. None of these things I regret. This was just all part of my learning journey on caring for plants. And don't be hard on yourself if, you know, things change and you learn and you do things a bit differently. That's totally fine. I just wanted to make this video as a way to, if you're starting out yourself, maybe this will point you in the right direction. If you have cared for plants for a really long time, you probably know all of these things. And if you have, and you have additional mistakes that you made or things that you'd like to know, please let me know in the comments below, and other people can go and read those comments and get extra information. If you are interested in some bonus content from me, you can join my Patreon. And just a little shout out to my lovely patrons. Thank you so much to Amanda, Amy, Grace, Hope, Michael and Yendi for your support this month. It truly means the world to me. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, the link is on the screen and also in the description of the video. So that is it from me. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you very soon in the next video. Bye!